I'm Jack from Jack Bell's Photography. I've been using a Nikon D7200 now for more than a year and a half, and I think it's now time to do a review. In my review, I'm going to cover an overview of the Nikon D7200 for use underwater. That includes a 60mm macro lens, the Tokina 10-17mm wide-angle lens, focus rings. I'm going to look at the key features for underwater photography specifically, features that aren't so useful, things to look out for, and my final thoughts. The Nikon D7200 is a high-quality DSLR camera with an APS-C size sensor. That means it provides the possibility for excellent image quality, depending obviously on the lenses that you use and the photographer that's using the camera. There are a wide range of housings required from several different manufacturers. These range from polycarbonate to aluminium housings, lower quality to higher quality. The choice is yours. The low light performance and high ISO performance are both very good, and these are very important in the underwater environment where light levels can drop off quite quickly, even in tropical areas. Certainly when you go down to 20 meters and the visibility is not very good because there are a lot of waves, then the light levels can actually be surprisingly low. There are also a wide range of lenses available, both for macro, normal photography, wide angle, whatever you require. And these are provided or supplied by Nikon themselves, as well as other third-party providers. And that gives you a great selection of lenses to choose from. What are the key features for underwater photography? Well, first of all, here's the camera. It's an APS-C size sensor. It's very highly rated by DxOMark and many other reviewers for what I'd call normal photography on dry land. It's smaller than a full frame, and especially if you include the camera body and lenses, and that could make it better for traveling, maybe a little bit better for shore entry as well. There's also a good dynamic range, very good image quality, and very high resolution. So these all are very important for underwater photography. But how does it compare to other camera systems which you may be considering? First of all, the image quality is perhaps not quite as good as a full frame, and some of the latest cameras probably have a better and faster focusing. But actually, are you going to really notice a difference? Certainly for most of the critters underwater, the focusing won't be an issue, and also for image quality, most of the time, most people are only going to look at images up to A4 size on their computer monitors. Any bigger than that, that's very unlikely. So are you really going to notice a difference in the image quality? What about Micro Four Thirds? Well, the image quality is better again than Micro Four Thirds, but will you actually notice? Perhaps if you zoom in and pixel peek, or if you print it off to a poster, for sure. But a lot of the reviews for Micro Four Thirds suggest that the low light capability is not as good for a Micro Four Thirds camera when compared to an APS-C size camera. So this could be a factor in underwater photography. The actual quality will depend on lenses. So there are a wide range of lenses available for Micro Four Thirds cameras, but the 2x crop factor may make wide-angle photography less good on the Micro Four Thirds than on an APS-C size sensor. So certainly you'll need to invest in the correct wide-angle fisheye lens. The 8mm from Panasonic or Olympus are both very good, but still the quality might not be up there with an APS-C size sensor. What about mirrorless, the elephant in the room? When you buy a camera, you invest in a camera system really. So you end up buying a lot of things for it, lenses, maybe other equipment such as flashes, strobes, etc. Some of this you may be able to take with you if you change systems. Some of it you'll be forced to sell. So that's a key issue. Also, with mirrorless perhaps being the future of photography, they currently appear to carry a premium compared to an equivalent DSLR APS-C size sensor camera. What are the advantages of mirrorless? Well, I think the EVF and screen provide you with the same performance. That's certainly different to most DSLRs. The ability to see how the photo is going to appear and fine-tune the settings that you want to use, that's got to be a great advantage and will mean less chimping, so checking your image on the screen, and fewer failed photos. So a higher success rate and gives you a better ability to get the photo that you really want. And also mirrorless do have smaller camera bodies, so maybe if you go for an APS-C size mirrorless, that's going to give you a good size advantage and weight advantage, certainly when it comes to traveling and perhaps for shore entries as well. For the Nikon, the autofocus is actually good if you use the viewfinder. So what I find is I've actually got a focus ring for my 16mm micro lens, the macro lens for my camera, which you can see here. And what I found in practice, I don't need this focus ring at all. I don't have to use manual focus. Very, very rarely in the last year and a half has it been even a consideration. I've always managed to use the autofocus very, very successfully. So if you don't need focus rings, then that can save you a few $100s a time. The other consideration is here for the taquina. Here, this has got the focus ring on the taquina lens. I've also put a band on top to stop the focus ring from slipping out, which it sometimes does. The focus ring there is actually to change the focal length. So for wide angle, you have to use autofocus anyway. But if you want to change the focal length of the lens, then the focus ring will allow you to do that. However, if you use a fixed focal length lens, then there's no need for a focal focusing ring either. A big advantage for a DSLR over most mirrorless cameras is the fact that the battery is much better. So you'll be able to get a full day shooting on a single battery, and sometimes that will take you through 2 days of shooting, which could be very good for traveling. And things like the TTL converters in the housing, that will extend your battery range. So that's good for something like a mirrorless system, but actually very, very good also for a DSLR. With the Nikon, you'll see a lot of buttons on the back and the top. These make the settings very easy to change underwater. So all I've done is allowed a single touch of the appropriate button, and then I can change the settings. So if I touch one of these buttons here, I don't have to keep it depressed. I can just touch it once, change the setting using one of the command dials at the front or at the rear, and then change the setting, and then press one time to finish, or just press another button like the focus button, because I've got back button focus set up as well, and then I can sort of take the photo. So that's really good underwater, where you're holding on to your housing. You really don't want to be holding a button with one finger and then trying to make changes with the other. It's much easier to do it this way. Back button focus is great. So here I've set up back button focus on the AEL AFL button, and again that means I can focus on the eye or whatever it is on the critter, and then I can take a series of photos. Sometimes it's good to adjust the lighting slightly, but no need to refocus. It's also a big advantage as well is the overall camera body and lenses are smaller and cheaper than a full frame camera. The image quality is going to be similar unless you blow up your photos or pictures to a much larger size or pixel peak. So what's not so good on a Nikon D7200? Well, the Nikon D7200 functionality works best when you use a viewfinder. If you switch to live view, it uses a different system for autofocusing and exposure control. What this means is that it's not as good if you use a screen, and that can sometimes be a problem. Also, something like the burst mode. So some cameras advertise themselves as having fantastic burst modes. That's not an issue underwater. If you try to do that underwater, you've got a good chance of burning out your strobes. So what do you have to look out for? Well, I've just hinted at that really. If you can't use a viewfinder, or you find the viewfinder hard to use underwater, then you can buy an additional viewfinder for different housing manufacturers, but this is very expensive. Quite often the viewfinder can be as expensive again as a housing, and the aluminium housing for a D7200, you're talking about something in the range of $2,000 to $3,000. So that's a big cost increase if you need an external viewfinder. It's large, so if you've got a housing and the handles, and you're trying to squeeze that in somewhere because you've got a critter that's hiding that you want to take a photo of, then actually it can be very difficult to maneuver your housing with the strobes into the correct position, or into the best position, or the position you actually desire to take a certain angle of photo. It's heavy, so that could be a factor for traveling. The lenses and the camera body are fairly heavy and much heavier than an equivalent system for a mirrorless camera from Panasonic, Fuji or Olympus. So that's worse for traveling and worse for shore entry. The size of which could be a factor for shore entry as well. So if you're struggling with a big system and you've got rocks on the entry point, that's not so easy and much more difficult than a smaller system. Final thoughts on the Nikon D7200. I think it's actually a very good underwater camera. There are some great, very sharp and fast lenses that you can use both for macro and wide angle underwater photography. There are a lot of housings available from the main manufacturers such as CNC and Nauticam. I personally use a CNC aluminium housing, and that's great if you dive a lot with your camera, as I do. The image quality is also very good, very hard to beat even with the latest cameras from both Nikon, Canon, Sony, etc. So you get a lot of value for your money and your investment in the system. And I find it very easy to use. The buttons make the access to the functionality very easy and quick to change underwater or on land. Are mirrorless the future? That's the million-dollar question, or the elephant in the room, depending whether you're an American or British. So the answer to that is probably. The advantages of a better screen that will work just as well as the electronic viewfinder. That's got to be a good thing in certain situations. Also, the good electronic viewfinder allows you to fine-tune your photo much more easily because you can see what effect your changes are making. And that's got to be a good thing. The question is about the mirrorless assistant. You might consider, is there a housing for it in the first place? And second, are there a range of housings? So if you've invested like I have in CNC, maybe you can reuse some of the items if you change cameras. Not if you go for a mirrorless and the mirrorless isn't available from your manufacturer. So that's all from me. So remember that photography is not a spectator sport, and see you next time.